Ready? Well, good evening or good afternoon, everyone. This is an early session for us as Just Ask Jen. Welcome, and we're going to be talking about the role of the treasurer since we are in the process of initiating a replacement as I retire in just a few short months. But let's start with introductions. So, as you know, I'm Jen Wagner, I'm the treasurer. To my left,
Brandon Craig, board member.
Dr. Moffitt, board member.
Lauren Roberts, Chief Audit Executive.
and Dr. Moffett, will you do your welcome, how to participate and ask questions thing?
It's my pleasure. Well, we have a whole studio audience full of people. But if you are here and you would like to come down to the podium, you can ask your question. And if you're online, feel free to raise your hand if you're on Zoom, hit that hand icon, and then we'll recognize you, and then you can speak. If you're on Facebook, type your question in, and then we've got some awesome staff and team members that are here that will take your question and we'll get your question as well. And again, if you're in person, just raise your hand and come on down and ask a question.
Thank you. All right, so if we'll start with the first slide, we're going to be diving into the role of the treasurer and in the state of Ohio, and it's kind of unique from other states and what the requirements are and kind of how we operate. So if you go to the next slide. So we're going to start with Ohio Department of Education and Workforce Department. Their requirements. The document is linked at the bottom of the slide stack, so you can go in and actually look. But I just kind of copied and pasted what they said. I wish I had seen this when I was starting out as a treasurer because it's been really helpful. But you know, basically, and I'm not going to read this word for word, so I'm just kind of gloss over some of these things so we can get to some good questions. But you know, we work closely with the district management team and advise the board. And they're an essential member of the administration team, and they report to the board. So next slide. I can't see that far. So according to ODEW, the four purposes of the treasurer is to follow all the state laws. Surprise, right? And there's a lot of them. Serve as an advisor to the board. Develop, implement, monitor the accounting system for fiscal integrity and efficiency, and to serve as a secretary of the board. So you see me in the board meetings, I'm actually taking roll call and recording all their decisions. That's my role defined by state law. So next slide. So what are the requirements for being an Ohio treasurer? You have to have an Ohio treasurer's license. And in order to gain that license, there's a couple different ways to get it. If you have a business degree, you need to take, in addition to having your degree, you need to take 3 hours of school law and 3 hours of school finance. If you don't have a business degree, you have to take an additional 9 hours of accounting classes because you really do have to understand basic accounting principles in order to run the department. On top of that, you have to serve 300 hours under a licensed treasurer. In all different areas of those accounting, the school district accounting function. And so it takes more than a minute to get that license. And so if you're interested, start now. Our Mike Guston is our current assistant treasurer. He's also licensed as a treasurer. We actually have an employee that's not in the county department interested in becoming a treasurer. So we've put together kind of a internship log, and so that they can fulfill their requirements as they're taking their classes, spend some time with us, and so that to give them an opportunity. Okay, next slide. Lots of words. So I just did kind of the highlights here. So under the Board of Education, they have to appoint one by May, and we can only go up to a 5-year contract. Although I think I've only ever had a 3-year, but I think the superintendent and the treasurer can have a 5-year, but we've never taken advantage of that, and it's, to my knowledge, in the history of the district. I have to execute a bond, so it protects the district against any liability issues that I might cause. Treasurer shall keep account of all school funds. I actually went and counted all the different funds. We have over 1,000 funds that we track. So there's 39 distinct kinds of funds. So we have local funds, state funds, and federal funds. There's 39 of that. But within the local funds, there's hundreds and hundreds. And so I was surprised to learn that we manage over 1,000 different funds. So it keeps us pretty busy. And then, of course, it's one of those do everything everybody tells you to do what the boss tells you to do, but I'm to perform all duties related to monies. It's pretty generic, isn't it? Yeah. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. And like I said, this is still out of this document that ODE put together. I'm supposed to record the proceedings of each board member, of each meeting of the board, produce monthly financials, and on the revenues, receipts, appropriations, expenditures, disbursements, and the balances. I'm required to sign all checks, which I do not do manually. We do electronic signatures, thankfully, because we sign a lot of checks. Next slide. Receive all funds on behalf of the district and deposit it into our depository account, our bank accounts. I act as an agent of the board in dealing with the Hamilton County and business community. And I'm responsible for the financial affairs of the district, including financial solvency and integrity. And I wanted to pause there and ask our chief audit executive, why is that important to the district?
Wonderful question. So financial integrity is a critical component for our taxpayers, which so fortunately fund our levies, as well as our community and our students who rely upon us to be good fiscal stewards of our spending to ensure every dollar that can end up in the classrooms and can be most efficient and effectively spent. So I'm glad Jen stopped there and highlighted that, because as our auditor, and I'm sure as our organization, really values fiscal solvency and integrity, of course.
So thank you, Lauren. On the next bullet, it talks about what's called a 412 certificate. And for any contract that's over $500,000, I have to certify that there's money set aside to pay that contract once we've committed to doing that. The next slide shows, they point out a list of required documents that I have to file. So every year we have to do a tax budget. It's usually in the first board meeting of the January. And basically we're certifying that we were bringing in enough revenues to make our debt payments. The certificate estimated resources gets filed with the Hamilton County Budget Commission or any district's budget commission. And so that they would go and verify to make sure that we're going to have enough revenues to support our expenses. The appropriations resolutions are the tool where the board gives the treasurer authority to spend money. And we appropriate at the fund level. We talked about the 412 certificates already. We're required to file two 5-year forecasts, one in November and one in May. And that's solely on the general operating fund of the district. And then what's called then and now certificates. You may hear us talking about those in public in some of our business meetings. And it's actual certificate I have to sign when somebody goes outside the procurement rules and they obligate the district. So in other words, they just pick up the phone, call the vendor, say, hey, I need 500 caps and gowns. And the vendor sends them over, and then we get an invoice, and I don't have a purchase order in place to pay for it. So I have to sign a certificate. It says the money was there then when the district was obligated, and it is there now when I want to pay the invoice. So, okay, so next slide. So having said all that, what Ohio requires of treasurers, what does that really apply to Cincinnati Public Schools? And so we have 7 elected board members that are my bosses, and I report directly to the board. So does the superintendent, and so does our chief internal audit executive. And so it's really important for the 3 of us to be in partnership in supporting the board's efforts. This is unique in Ohio because in most states the treasurer reports to the superintendent, but in Ohio they had really want to have checks and balances and internal controls so that the superintendent can't overly influence how monies are being spent or inappropriately, so to speak. So, okay, next slide. So what does a treasurer's office do functionally on a day-to-day basis? And it's basically 4 different areas. So the first being everybody's normally accounting processes. So payroll, accounts payable where we pay our vendors, accounts receivable where we bring money in, budgeting and grant management, which is actually under fund management. And then under fund management, we take care of all the state and federal grants and ensure compliance so that we're spending money appropriately for each individual grant and its purpose. And then we have financial reporting transparency, which is where we do the 5-year forecasting and all our financial reporting and our debt management and our investment documents and efforts, cash management. And then in financial technology supports the software that runs our general ledger, payroll, the HR system, and a bunch timekeeping, leave management, all those. They do a help desk, they do the training, and they actually, one of the most important things is the integration between the software systems so that we do have really good financial integrity with the data. So on the next slide, it actually shows you some of the details behind each of those buckets. I won't go into them. They're there just for people's reference, just to kind of further define what those 4 buckets mean. But in the interest of time, I wanted to just, anybody have any questions about that slide?
I don't have any questions, I think, but I have seen this, so I may be a little tone deaf because I've seen it and I know it. Do
Right.
we have any questions around from the audience, Rob? Anybody have any questions? I do want you to share, Jen, like, we talk about accounting, fund management, financial reporting. What is the budget for? Like, how much money are we talking about? Are we just talking about 20 million or, hey, it's just a measly $10 million? What is the budget for?
So the general fund operating budget was $640 million, and we manage close to 800 million with all of our funds. With ESSER, it was over almost $1 billion. And so now that ESSER's gone, we're back down to probably $800 million overall. So, we have 6,500 employees that we process every payroll. And so, and actually, in the next slide, it gives you some details on kind of the, waiting for Rob to switch to the next slide. Thank you. Just kind of talk about the volume of what we do. And so this was all of fiscal last year. So from July 1st of 2023 through June 30 of 24, I'll just read a couple of them. So we had 12,327 payments to our vendors. That represented $336 million. Where's payroll? Payroll, 119,000 payroll checks for $205 million. P&C, so we have a procurement card that acts like kind of like a credit card. We had almost 7,000 transactions, 350 active cards, and that is one person's job in our department. That's all they do is credit card reconciliation and chasing after people who haven't submit their statements and their receipts. And then the last one is probably something that's not readily apparent. The project cash request. So we spend money, and then at the end of every month, we request back from the state or federal grant, reimburse us for that money. And those are called project cash requests. And so we submitted 174 for $134 million this last year. So we do a lot of work. There's currently 48 people in the department to cover all those services. And so, next slide.
Wait, before you leave
Oh,
there.
yeah, sorry.
So just one more question.
Mhm.
I think it's important for people to understand, we don't have a choice. We have to put that money up front for project cash requests. It's not just saying, that's not something that we decided
Right.
to do. We have to, and then what goes underneath that we would have to have money for first in order to put it up for?
Well, so for example, Title I is $22 million. And so we would, if we were, some of our staff members that are paid under Title I, we pay their payroll, and at the end of the month, we ask the state to reimburse us. So they do a review to make sure that what we're asking for is compliant. So it's a secondary review. We have our grants department that does it on this before we spend it, and then ODE does it after we spend it before they reimburse us. And sometimes they'll call and say, hey, we need more detail, or this doesn't sound right. And then, so they keep us in check for sure.
There are a lot of checks and balances too. I'm
Yes.
sure you're probably going to go into it, and we definitely have our internal auditor here, but we also have other entities that check and balance us as well.
Yeah, so we were audited to the nth degree. I think last year we had, 13 or 14 different audits and that takes a lot of work to prepare for and answer all their questions and teach them how to audit. Sometimes we get some of the newbies that come to big districts, so they learn on us, they cut their teeth on us, so we have to teach them a lot. But, and so, yeah, it does take a lot of work, but we welcome that level of compliance and interest and research, because we want them to attest that we are being good stewards of our taxpayer dollars. So, and then that's why we have such a great partnership with the internal audit team, because they help us get better. You can always be better, always. So next slide is, so after all the technical things that ODE says the treasurer has to do, the state, Ohio says you have to do. So what about the soft skills, right? So nobody ever talks much about the soft skills. So we're going to reverse things up. I'm going to ask these three instead of them asking me questions. What do you think are important soft skills to have in your district treasurer?
Well, so what I will say is I think one of the major skill sets as a soft skill is that you're managing a team. And what we often don't think about when we think about the treasurer, when we think about the superintendent and the chief internal auditor, or chief internal audit executive, is that they're managing people. And I think one of the things that I have appreciated about the leadership you've brought in some ways is also that it's not just about getting the work done, but it's about managing the people who are doing the work. And that's a real struggle, because we get a lot of folks who can do the work, right? Like the running joke is that you promote somebody up because they've been there long enough to get promoted. But what we don't see oftentimes is someone who understands that folks need certain skill sets to manage people's time, manage people's workload, manage their development. And that, in a lot of ways, is where we're moving towards, and especially in some of the guidance from the state, is to make sure you're constantly preparing the next person. This is a crucially important thing also for treasurers, because as you stated in the beginning, it takes your arm and leg, your third kid, and everything else to get licensed to be a treasurer in the state of Ohio. And it is such a different culture than other states. I think that's the other part that I will add, that is from a soft skill aspect. We have such a culture in Ohio that really puts a lot of responsibility onto a treasurer and puts a lot of risk onto a treasurer's role. And I think that is something that, in a lot of ways, someone who's not a good manager of people then won't be a good manager of systems, and puts their own self at risk. So the more you manage your team better, the more prepared they are to do their job, the more prepared they are to give folks the lower end their responsibilities, the better the system works. So that then there's not the same personal risk that comes to being a treasurer.
So I'm going to say a professional one and then a personal one. And professionally, I think with the responsibilities of the treasurer, in part being the parliamentarian, then you have to be a great listener. There's things that go on, I don't know how you capture it. And maybe because I'm in the moment, I'm like, who said what? But you're able to capture those things of who said, you understand procedures, and then effective management of leadership, but then you're listening to the 7 board members who are your boss in a meeting. And then also, which leads me to my second one, which is, I think you have to be a great code switcher. And I would say that in the context of, there are 7 distinct personalities and 7 people who have different learning styles, but you're accountable to all of them. And you have to be able to provide the information that is being requested in the manner that that particular person needs it, not collectively for the group. And so I think it's great. Some of us are really interested and into finance. Some of us have absolutely no desire for it. And being able to provide it at the level that that person needs, and then back that up with information, I think is super significant. You just need to be a great communicator, and I'm going to suggest listening, the listening aspect of that. And then also the code switching, being able to manage 7 different personalities that are requesting 7 different things, oftentimes 7 different ways, maybe it's 7 different times, is just a skill set that I think a lot of people have, but not very many people do that very well. So those are 2 things One, personally, I like finance, so we vibe. But there are some board members and my colleagues that are just like, I don't know what you just said when you're talking about school funding. So being able to take that off the paper is super significant.
Yeah, and I might take that a step further and reach out to the partnership with the treasurer and the community, as well as the treasurer and other administrators in the district. So I think one thing that makes a really strong treasurer that Jen does a wonderful job exhibiting is being the interpreter of all of those things you saw on those past slides, all of the really technical, really highly compliant, and really detailed areas, and being able to convert that and translate that into what it means for our administration and for our community. One thing I think that makes a great business person is being able to be that conduit between the strategy and then the technical work that needs to follow. So I think in terms of soft skills as a treasurer, being able to take things up to the 10,000-foot level to start community conversations and try to hone in on where people want to go as an organization, but then layer in, okay, well, we want to go here, but we must remember this point of compliance. And I might even add along a bit of creativity, because a lot of times we say we can't do it this way. However, if we can understand the compliance requirements and some of the financial requirements, there is in fact a way to accomplish what you want while still being compliant. So I think that creative aspect and the community partnership and the interpretation side is probably not recognized as much as it could be. So I think that's a huge skill set.
I'm reminded also that there are times where a treasurer needs to be willing to take the blow that is a hard decision or a hard point to stand on, right? Because I think some of this stuff is always going to be hard. As a school district, a lot of decisions we make don't make people happy. It's going to make a lot of people mad and sad and whatnot. As a treasurer, though, there are going to be times, to your point, Lauren, that you will have to say, we cannot do this because we don't have no money. And here's other stuff we might be able to do, or here are the things that we could give up to do it, but we cannot do. And if you are not willing to stand on that limb sometimes and make that hard point, but offer suggestions, offer solutions, be collaborative in doing so, that can be a really hard time being a treasurer, because in some ways, in other districts, or other states, I should say, where the treasurer reports up to the superintendent, they really are just managing the finances. And they're not offering decisions. They're not being the decision person. They're saying, you want to do something? Okay, well, that's what it costs. There you go. That's not what the state of Ohio asks of the role of the treasurer. And I think that is an important part to distinguish, because yes, you are collaborative in how we work with the superintendent to make the district run, to keep the district fiscally sound. But also, in a lot of ways, as we talk about things like our strategic plan, as we talk about things like our facilities needs, it is the role of the treasurer to say, here are our options, but also to say, here's what we may give up, or we could change this to do this differently so that you can afford it. Because I do think that is where we are today in our current culture in the state of Ohio with how they fund schools. We're going to have more and more of those conversations, sadly, because each of these large districts just can't keep taxing their own people and saying, "Give me more money every time." So eventually, we are going to have to start saying more and more the hard decisions. And I think that, to Dr. Moffitt's point about having to work with 7 different people, and really we're talking about like 9 in our district, because you have the board members, you have the superintendent, you have internal audit, to really be all working together. Everybody has to play their role to kind of sometimes hold each other accountable to that process. And so I think that's an important role for a treasurer, to be strong enough to do so.
Thank you. Those are great comments. And I'd have to say the collaboration is probably one of the biggest challenges from people, treasurers that have come from the outside, because we are more decentralized in our decision making than other school districts in the state of Ohio. So they're not used to having to do that. And quite often, you're in a position to be a partner, but also to be the accountability person. And so sometimes you are on that limb all by yourself and having to say, I'm sorry, but no, And I learned over the years, not to say we can't afford it, because we do have a lot of money. It's just how we choose to spend the money and the priorities that we place on that is the decision to be made. But once we've committed everything, then you can say, no, we can't afford anything more. Because remember my water bottle analogy. So, so those are great, great skills. So how about some questions from the public?
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Let's see. So let's start with, since we're talking about regulation and compliance, how does the treasurer ensure compliance and federal regulations, financial regulations?
So first we have to understand what those regulations are depending on the state and federal guidelines, depending on each fund. And then we have to educate those that make the spending decisions. And then every requisition that gets entered into the system goes through a checks and balances and approval process. So we're looking for, is the ask budgeted and is it an appropriate use of those funds? And so we have a grants team that does that compliance. And like I said, ODE does a follow-up to make sure that we are spending this. I'm sorry about my voice. My allergies are like terrible. So I don't know, do you want to add anything to that, Lauren?
No, I think that's a great interpretation because I think the starting point always is getting a good lay of the land and what are the expectations, and then the process to support it. And then where internal audit can come into play with our district specifically is sampling and testing against those established procedures and compliance requirements, which gives our administration and our board, our treasurer and superintendent good feedback as to whether our procedures are acting and behaving and producing the results as they intended and that we are in fact in compliance. So I think through each of those layers, we're able to ensure full compliance with federal and financial regulations.
Another one?
Yeah, how long have you been the treasurer for the district and experience, and how has the work changed over time? And maybe even a caveat, how did COVID affect that in the middle as well and change things? Just for fun.
Okay, do we have an hour? So I'm coming up on my 10th year as the treasurer, but I've been with the district for over 30 in a variety of different roles. And prior to coming to the district, I was in corporate America in accounting. And so I've had corporate accounting experience, manufacturing, as well as school district. Second part of that question was, how has it evolved? I think as the technology has evolved and the skill set of our decentralized participants in terms of the budgeting and the interest of the school board, we used to have school boards who basically never really wanted to hear from the treasurer. No, this board is a lot more in tuned financially, and I love that. But so it kind of depends on the personality of the board, the personality of the superintendent. I've served under 10 different superintendents, and they've all had very different skill sets when it comes to financial management. And so you have to kind of adapt to who your partner is and, teach and support and be patient. And so and then with COVID and anytime a new state rule comes, graduation requirements change, we have to kind of pivot to what we're going to fund. I remember the year they did the third grade guarantee, it came in like October. And so we had to really be flexible with what we were spending our money on. So we just have to be able to be adaptable as time has gone on. And the third part was COVID. Yeah. Well, we had 27 different versions of the budget under COVID. We were trying to figure out what kind of a district we were going to be and how we were going to operate and what did social distancing mean and all that kind of stuff. And the COVID money really helped the district, but it was difficult because the rules for spending changed year after year. So they were refining their rules as we were progressing through COVID and post-COVID and how those funds were supposed to be used. So at first it was, how do we just survive, save jobs, keep people healthy? Then it was, how do we do work remotely, educating, running payroll, and then it was about supporting learning loss or how to recover from learning loss. And through all that, it was about making sure the buildings were safe places. And so we, school districts just kind of learned as we went along. So it was kind of difficult to be, so, sorry.
Before we go on, I think one thing that I think is an important part to note also about the role of the treasurer evolving is that, at different times, the state has allowed for different things. At different times, we've used different technologies you talked about. But even stuff like how you fundraise for a school now is very different than how we fundraised 20 years ago, right? Or 25 years ago. The things that we ask of our families to give to the district and the cost of those things, or the things we're asking parents to do and the cost of those things have evolved. And like the next evolution of that, though, I think about a lot in my normal job is things like name, image, likeness, money that folks want to pump through the school towards our students or to pay for programming, and how all of those things, to the earlier question about regulations, pay so much or is so much on the treasurer to make sure we get it right beforehand, and on the internal auditor to make sure that we put the systems in place to verify that we're continuing to do it right, or that we actually executed it correctly. And so I do think that's going to be one of the interesting challenges as we go forward, is the way folks connect into our schools and fund programming and work with our schools is evolving. And that puts its own unique challenges on the treasurer's role.
Yes, if you think about very recently with social media, GoFundMe and crowdfunding and how that's evolved, and we didn't have a policy to address that stuff, so we had to quickly do research and figure out what the rules were and how to educate and adopt a policy. And so that, because even though it seems like a great thing to do, there are rules and regulations that once the money hits the district, we have to follow the state rules no matter what. So there's like never, ever, ever, ever do gift cards. Ever. And everybody wants to give gift cards as like raffle door prizes, and we just can't. State auditor is very clear, that's a no. So so that was one thing where we had to pivot.
I also want to add that it is the accountability piece. It's easier for the community to do gift cards because, hey, everybody's got a sale on gift cards. But there are some other like Ohio ethics violations that we need to be mindful of too. And you mentioned the Ohio auditor, and we have our internal auditor, but sometimes what seems easiest to do might not be what we can allow to happen. And again, that's that code switching that I think is important around communication, being able to say, we want your involvement, but we have to have it this way. And then people look at us like, well, then you don't really want my involvement. Well, actually we do, but we don't want to go to jail more than we don't want your involvement. And so that is, as we reimagine, I think COVID has given us the ability to reimagine education. I always say that, but those things now come with a cost. Technology is huge, whereas prior to COVID, we have a large lease with computers in our district, and donations. People want to pay fees. People want to do those things, and those things are great. But then how are we held accountable for those things too?
So 18 years ago, when I took over as a CIO, we had Apple computers that were 12 years old out in the schools. And
That's
can you
not good,
imagine
Jen.
having a
That's not
12-year-old computer that this day and age? I mean, after 6 months, we want to trade in and do something new, right? And so, yeah, I mean, life has really changed in the last decade and a half.
And then the other thing I wanted to bring up is to add an additional caveat to the difficulties of the role is, I just lost my train of thought. Oh, the school funding formula and how that has evolved over time. And I don't want you to go into it because that's another Just Ask Jen that we've already done. But advocating for fair funding for our district and how our district is getting funding differently than other districts in the state is another role that's super, super hard and has evolved over time. So I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Well, yeah, the state funding formula changes every 2 years. or it has in recent pasts. And so you do have to stay on top of every Senate bill and House bill that gets introduced that's related to finance and how that might impact the district, and help your legislators understand that things might have a negative or a impact. And so some of those conversations are rather delicate, and not always fun, but we have to protect the district's assets. So that's
So an additional role is also legislatively advocating for the district on that level. I know we were at, we had breakfast with the legislators, and you were talking to a few of our senators and Congress people and state reps about how their decisions for some pending bills could adversely impact our district, and advocating for not only the school funding formula, but different things that come along the line, down the line, that it will impact us. So that's a lot. I think it just sounds sexy to say I'm a school treasurer, but there's so much behind it.
So they actually make a distinction between a school treasurer and a chief financial officer. And most school treasurers mostly deal with cash, the management of the cash, a 5-year forecast, and that kind of stuff. The CFO is really responsible for the financial operations of the district, in addition to the cash, right? So it's a bigger job than a lot of people think about. But
We are searching for a chief,
Yes.
not a
yes.
not a treasurer.
We use, and my title is treasurer/chief financial officer, so I serve as both. But it depends. I'll introduce myself as either the treasurer, depending on if I'm with school type people, or if I'm talking to business community or whatever. I use the CFO title because it means more meaningful to them, right? Another question?
Yeah, we kind of touched on this a little bit. Thinking about where automation and how it has come in and technology has come in the last 10 years while you've been here, how has that changed over time? And also, do you see as AI becomes a new part of it, how might that change the role moving forward for school districts?
So technology changes. So it used to be, we used to have payroll on paper timesheets, and they got sent in, and then people had to enter that data. And checks got printed and signed. All of our vendor contracts were printed and signed manually. All of our employee contracts, so probably 3,000 to 4,000 employees have employment contracts that get renewed. And the district treasurer was supposed to sign each and every one of them. So electronic signature applications became really nice, especially when we started doing vendor contracts that way. Then you remember, if you've been around in the district for a while, those little blue leave forms. I couldn't wait to tear those things up when we did leave management. And so, so basically going from paper pencil and being able to use our systems to do analytics. So looking for spending trends and starting to calculate return on investment. So are we getting the best bang for our buck where we're spending it? Dashboards, we've developed a bunch of dashboards so that we can monitor the performance of the district, either on the academic side of the house or in the financial side of the house, and then tie those things together. What else? Cell phones, communication, robocalls, communicating to our employees and our parents and our families. Even the busing systems technologies help tracking where the buses are and whether they're on time, and we use that to hold them accountable financially. Anything else come to mind?
One of the things, and I think you spoke to it with regards to payroll and that aspect, I think that's one aspect of thinking about the chief financial officer versus the treasurer role, is that as things evolve in how we even pay people, right? So, in our state, we have certain rules and regulations about how we pay folks and that type of deal, but you have to be so on top of operational aspects of that role in technology, even more so than you have to be over the dollar amount.
Right.
Like, we know how much you're supposed to get paid, but did we pay you the right time? Did we pay your taxes? Did we
Right.
do this? Did we do that? What happened when you gave this back?
Well, and we have 6 collective bargaining agreements, all have different rules on how to handle things. And so you have to know those things. But another thing that came to mind on innovation was the development of the budget. So when I took over as a treasurer, we were building budgets on Excel spreadsheets. And you remember, we have these student-based budgeting, so every school was building their own budget, and you don't have control over somebody messing up your formulas and changing information or typing words where numbers are supposed to go. And so adding all that stuff up from 65 different schools, and then we have 40 different central budgets. We had to add all that up manually in Excel spreadsheets. And then you don't have version control, so you never know which one's the right version. That was a nightmare. So now we have this beautiful software called AllaView. And it's web-based, and it consolidates and it helps us analyze the data, and it just makes everything smoother and more accurate.
I think one other thought, and I can pass this actually over to our internal auditor with this, is that adding technology has also made things both more efficient, but actually in some ways more accurate as to what you're operating with. And so I think that's maybe one aspect of the treasurer's role as to, you know, how many times did you get, to your point right now, how many times you have 3 different spreadsheets that y'all are working from? No one knows which one's the actual one that you're supposed to be using because everybody's done something different on each of the 3. And now you're sitting there at the end going, well, I thought we had 30 million in this bucket. No, we only had 22. Where did 22 come from?
Well, even Google's great because you can share documents and everybody can collaborate on them, but they can also screw up your version of the document, right? I've had things wiped out from other people. So, yeah, so Lauren?
Yeah, I was going to also tie that into the AI conversation because I think the fear, and I think we've moved past this a little as a business community or as an organization, but the fear is that robots are going to take our jobs. And I think it's very clear that, you know, while we still might have some concerns about that, I do think the practical application of AI and other automation and technology tools is that it allows us to be more efficient and more, you know, reliable because the process is going to run the same way every time once it's programmed. I think the other really big innovation that we've seen in the Treasurer's Office as well as throughout the district that people may be surprised by because you think of, you know, big companies doing these things. Well, CPS is a big company. We're a big organization, and we have been able to utilize rather technologies to automate, which now frees up our employees' time rather than doing data entry, for example. They're analyzing those things. So we're putting information into a system, letting it do some of the heavy lifting and allowing our humans to do the work that we need our humans to do, which is to use their judgment, their professionalism, and analyze information to hopefully catch those outliers. So I think it's really important for the community to understand CPS is really serious about those advancements in technology to ensure we have good, solid processes.
Well, and then just because a program ran or the software ran doesn't necessarily mean it produced the right results. So you have to have a human thought to say, does that make sense, right? And so, and we have dabbled a little bit in terms of creating what we call bots. And so it's software that takes repetitive steps and will go do it for you. So humans don't have to do that stuff. And so we'll have, for one example that we use a bot for is they will go in and compare like the state auditor's website to look for new Community Reinvestment Act agreements or new parcels that pop up that we need to bill for to get our taxes. And then Mike, shout out another example of how we use a bot. Right, so AP invoices, they will, vendors will send us an invoice into a accounts payable account, and the bot will go in and grab it and disperse it into our AP system. It still takes a clerk to review it to make sure that it's right and to get it through workflow, but they're not hand entering invoices anymore. So, more questions? How are we doing on time? I do have 3 questions that were submitted by the website, and I have answers for them.
We have 15 minutes left.
Okay, so let's go with 5 more, and then we'll take the last 5 or so minutes, 5 or 10 minutes to do that.
Great. Your team has been focusing a lot on quality improvement. Why is quality improvement so important, and why is your team focusing so hard on it?
So that's a great question. So I was professionally raised under Deming's philosophies, so I brought TQM to the district. And so for every dollar that we can save in our efficiencies, a couple things. One is a dollar that goes back in the classroom. And 2, we serve our people or schools better who serve our students better. So the faster we can process a requisition and we actually have 9 quality improvement teams in the department. that are actively working on making sure that we're faster and more efficient. So we look at how many times do we reject a requisition because something's missing? How many days does it take us to convert a requisition into a purchase order? How fast are we paying Schedule E payments? We look at paycheck errors to see where the root causes of an error are. And 96% of the errors occur in payroll outside of the payroll department. I mean, we make our own fair share of errors, but 96% of the errors on a paycheck occur from either this originating source at the school or because there was something messed up in their account. So we looked at staffing, vacant positions, and we looked at employee reimbursements is another one that we're looking at. I'm trying to remember all 9 of them. How fast are we paying the invoices of a vendor invoice? So we actually made huge improvements into that. We were looking at all the invoices that were over 30 days old and why, and we've really improved that dramatically. What else?
I was just going to say, I think from a staffing end, and we've talked about this at the last few Budget Finance and Growth Committee meetings, the value add of what we're doing allows us to better think about, okay, if this is not adding the value we're expecting, or if we're not seeing the results we're expecting, how do we improve? Because to your point at the beginning of the day, at the beginning of the answer there is, all of this is about making sure that our students learn more, can do more, and achieve more, and supporting the staff in how they get them there, right? And so more dollars you can put into a program that's successful or putting into a different program that will make things work better or faster or more efficient is great. I think one of the biggest ones for me, you all did the review of contracts and recognizing and appreciating how many different contracts our district signs each year. But also, sometimes it's about just getting the efficiency out of that contract. How many times do we have an administrative fee when we do a contract each time separate, as opposed to having one larger contract do it that way? Or in some cases, are we contracting out something great at one school that maybe other schools might need and could be utilized? Or like those things, or how fast are we getting the contracts in? Does everybody know those processes? Which I think, again, we talk about an audit committee at times about how much do folks understand the steps, because that also helps you get better at doing the work, right? If you are submitting a bunch of then and nows because you ain't figured out that you need to put the contract in first before you place an order, maybe we have to come and educate, right? I think Dr. Moffitt has been big on that point of how much do we educate folks how to do the process correctly, so that we don't see a list of 400 then and nows in a month because someone said, I wanted to hire everything for an event.
Yeah, so a couple years ago, Mike and I together built a class called Finance 101, and it's just the basics of school district accounting, how to spend money properly. And so I did the first, 5 or 6 of them, and then Mike took over and he's just run with them. So he offers them, 8 or 10 a year that people can come to. And the other thing I wanted to say was I wanted to shout out Children's Hospital, because they've invested in the whole quality movement effort, and they created some classes, they called it Impact U, and they allow us to send our staff members into their classes, and then they help coach and support them through the process. And I've sent so many people through. Mike's now he's a coach for them, and so we've got a great partnership. We really appreciate Dr. Kahn and Susan Spriggs and the Children's Hospital effort for quality improvement. So I just wanted to say that. What's that? Oh, okay. So flip to the next slide. So we created this year a button on our webpage. One more time. And so people to ask questions. Either originally it was kind of tell us what topics you want us to address at a Just Ask Jen. But some of these questions they're just great questions. And so what I'm going to try to do each time is in between, we'll get the questions gathered and then get the answers together. We'll share them here, and then we'll post them as a running Q&A on the website, so you can go back and look. But so this question was about yellow busing and how we looked at alternative models. And Mr. Burkhart, who's our Chief Operating Officer, helped answer this question. He said they've explored many options. Most districts actually buy their own buses and have their own drivers, and we've been outsourcing ever since I've been with this district. So, yeah. So I won't read the entire question, mostly because I can't read it from here. So I don't know, Lauren, you want to read the answer for us? So you're closer.
Sure. So the answer that was provided says, yes, CPS Transportation has explored many more options which may save money in the long run. These include, but are not limited to, a longer walk to stop distance, a hub and spoke model at select schools, which would require students to transfer buses to get to their final location, and also a combination of van and bus routes for those areas where only a few students need services. These are in discussion but have not yet been implemented.
Thank you. I did find my answers here so I can read. Okay, so the next question that was submitted on September 8th was whether or not the district saves money switching from neighborhoods to middle schools or intermediate schools. And there is there's some initial costs that when it's not, so you take a K-8 building and you take the little people out and you put bigger people in, you still have to convert the little people bathrooms and stuff like that. So there's usually an early investment in that budget, but we're hoping that'll be cost neutral after that first investment. In fact, they're looking that hopefully will have an impact, a positive impact on transportation costs. And anecdotally, academically, you can pool your resources to focus on middle school needs. So, we started when I first came to the district, there were K-6, we had middle schools then, and then 9-12s. And then we had, of course, a couple K-12s, and I think SEP at the time was 312. And then they decided that they wanted the 7th and 8th graders in the elementary because they needed a little bit more social and emotional support. Well, then they changed the high school graduation, and so we thought, well, we need the 8th graders to start taking algebra, but you can't get credit for an algebra unless you're with a high school certified teacher, so we put the 7th and 8th graders in the 7-12 buildings, and sometimes that's just not the best environment. We also left some 7th and 8th graders in the K-8 buildings, and it got to the point where there wasn't enough 7th and 8th graders to support a full academic team, and so it became financially difficult to support it. So we're kind of going back to the middle school concept, and we did our first one this year with Schroeder Middle School, and so we'll be monitoring those things. And then on October 7th, I think we'll be hearing about what the next phase of that looks like.
Just before you move past it, I think this also highlights something that you were discussing, which is that the role of the treasurer is not just to tell you what the costs are. They're to tell you about the options and what those things might mean, depending on your own priorities, the board sets that the superintendent looks at, because it's so easy to sit there and say, oh, it'll cost less, and it'd be like, well, not actually. If you do this, it'll cost the same. Well, then it'll cost more. Like, no, not actually. If you do this, it'll cost the same, right? Or it'll cost less.
Right.
So it's good for that.
And to your point, Board Member Craig, it's never easy to come up with scenarios. So we asked for scenarios before, but it's always, okay, if you move the kids from this building to open up another building, that one little change or one little request impacts 4 or 5 other buildings, which impacts transportation, which impacts staffing. So it's never easy to just answer a question directly. I've learned that because I've asked the question multiple times, and I'm like, okay, and it's been, okay, but if you move that, then where are they gonna go? And it's like, well, I don't wanna move them. I just want, but they're impacted because of that. So in reflection, we have 66 buildings. We have X number of students that are all impacted, and we can think of things in totality, but the reality is things are intertwined. So when we say middle schools, and we've spent significant amounts of time during ad hoc and Just Ask Jen previously and in board discussions, so go back and watch those, but it's never just simply financial. That financial entails staffing, entails transportation, entails curriculum, it entails a lot.
Well, we have 91 square miles in the district, and when we started with the facility master plan, since then, the whole population has shifted in neighborhoods. So at the beginning of the plan, we were forced to close and get rid of 14 schools. We've had to buy some of those back, right, and build others. And so it's not so easy to make a plan and then it just stays that way for 10 years. Okay, the third question that was submitted on September 11th was about college tuition and how you can get money for children to help pay for college and help other benefits. It's a great question. I asked our college and career expert, Emily Maroney, to answer this question. And she provides some resources there. So if you're interested in those areas, please visit the website there. And you know, there's a ton, if you just do searches, I mean, I remember when my kids were getting ready to go to college, I was online all the time looking for stuff. So, but we have a department that supports our students who want to get into college and, or employment or enlisted. And so I would highly recommend you reaching out there. And we'll post all these on the website. We have our experts in the room, our comms team in the room, so they will help support our efforts in this area. They're another great partnership that we've had. So thank you for these great questions, because they're not things I would have thought of necessarily to even talk about. So keep the questions coming. We really appreciate it. I hope you learned something today, especially if you're interested in being the next CPS treasurer. The last slide we have is just to show the next topic, the next two topics for our Just Ask Jens. November 12th, Howard District's funded. Walk through the state funding formula at kind of a high level because people will fall asleep in the middle of it. And then property taxes, even another level complexity. And then on December 3rd, we're going to talk all about levies because we have one on the ballot next November as a renewal. And so we're going to start educating people now on what the different options are. Another thing, you can try this or you can do that, or you know, different options, and they all have unintended consequences. Any last minute thoughts?
Treasurer's job is hard.
It's fun though. It's a great challenge. I feel challenged every day when I come in here.
I think if we'd asked you this question when you first started, it may not have been such a positive answer, but over time, you've grown into this role, and we are super sorry that you're leaving. However, things change, and we understand. People need to retire. But this is a very big responsibility, and it's a very big task, and it's for the right person. And so definitely we need the person who is not necessarily CPS born and bred, but definitely about collaboration and knows their stuff. So we're looking forward to getting some more information, and sorry to see you leaving. I'm really excited about the November topic because this is exactly where our community can help us become more educated, but also who you put in, who you elect definitely impacts our state funding formula and the things that we need in order to successfully educate our students and support our staff. So we need you to understand the state funding formula. It is not the most sexy and interesting, but it is definitely needed. So thanks for that topic.
Of course. Lauren, any last minute comments?
Oh, no, I just want to, again, highlight the role of the treasurer and the importance within the district. And we're fortunate to have a board that highlights the role of the treasurer, our superintendent, and myself to show the importance of all of us working together among with our teams and our communities to accomplish the things that the district has ahead for ourselves. So very much appreciate being included this evening.
Thank you. Thank you very much, everyone, and good night.